Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I know you must have missed her. Here is Aseel back again, and we are amplifying our profit pillar today. I'm going to talk about an interesting subject, and you tell us what it is, Aseel, because we're excited.
Well, anytime we explore what should we talk about today, we come up with a whole variety of really interesting topics. So it's always hard to choose. But what we're exploring today is the concept of enough. And what is really interesting about the concept of enough is that almost simultaneously, people associate having enough with either settling or even just becoming lazy and not wanting more. And we're going to debunk some of these myths around this word and really explore it from many different angles. So I'm really excited to explore this.
I'm excited as well.
Yeah.
So really trying to understand like what is enough and what is enough to each person is probably different depending on our conditioning. So, okay, I'm excited.
A lot of what I have to share with you today is inspired by a recent keynote speech that I heard at the Financial Therapy Conference, which happened recently. And this specific keynote is titled The Disciplined Pursuit of Enough by Brian Portnoy. And he raised really interesting points that I'm going to be infusing throughout this discussion because it offers us a lens and a framework to kind of contemplate on. And what he ended the presentation is, and it's interesting, I'm starting with the end, it's like more is a number, but enough is a mindset.
Oh, okay.
Which is a really cool perspective. But the interesting highlights of this presentation is first really keeping some of the considerations in mind. First, having enough and wanting more mutually coexist in each human being. And there's many different reasons to why that is. And we're going to explore some of these reasons. And throughout our life, we're constantly going to be exploring the balance between both. And the struggle really happens when we are out of balance between pursuing more and being content and fulfilled with it enough.
Yes.
And what he was suggesting in his talk is not necessarily reconciling and looking for that balance, but embracing the flow between both. And that was something that I thought was interesting. But before we get into the different angles we're going to explore, when someone asks you, what is enough? How do you define that?
What is enough? Well, it depends on the subject. What is enough money? What is enough? Is it related to money or to anything?
Well, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? That's like the interesting thing. Like when somebody tells you what is enough, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that question?
Enough, for me, the word like satisfied comes up, or like satiated. So I'm satisfied. I don't need any more. I'm content. I have all that I need. So these are the words that come up for me. I haven't really personally explored this theme before. So that's why it's kind of interesting and exciting. And even when you said that you wanted to talk about this, I purposely didn't explore too much because I wanted to kind of see what was going to come up.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's three angles we're going to explore this concept through. And you're right. When somebody asks you what is enough, it's interesting to reflect on what is enough from what angle. Is it the money I make? Like an income? Is it the wealth I accumulate? Is it the type of experiences or items I purchase? Like, what are we really talking about here? So the three angles we're going to look through is the first one being the philosophical or theological approach to addressing that question. The second being the biological, neurological concept. And the third being the economical and historical. Because depending on which lens you're looking at, the approach to this topic is quite different. And really the answer is going to be very personal. So we're really just offering you lenses and frameworks into which you can explore this topic through. But the ultimate integration of this knowledge is really ultimately back onto the listener to reflect on how these things apply to your own life. So we really just offer guidelines here. So from a philosophical and theological standpoint, and this was also inspired by the keynote I mentioned earlier, I thought it was interesting that he said the earliest stories in the Bible is talking about paradise itself not being enough. And that was an interesting thing because it really tells you how the start of the human being is getting out of paradise and eating the fruit. I'm not very knowledgeable about theological concepts, but that story particularly is universal. Everybody knows about it.
Yeah.
So regardless which religion you fall into, or even spirituality like the Taoism, there's really interesting sayings that I have noted here for you just to contemplate on. And Lao Tzu said, for example, if you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. And he also said, when there's no desire, all things are at peace. But these concepts have always been very philosophical because it's impossible for us not to have desires or not to want more, which is why the struggle is real, because on some level, people who pursue spirituality want to achieve this Zen lack of desire type of lifestyle, but we are not wired that way. So let's explore that.
So interesting. And again, like when I was conceptualizing conscious economics, it was this idea or this notion that in our current system, it's never enough. There's always more. Like we want more things. We reach a certain goal and then we already are thinking about the next one. Or by the time we reach the goal finally, we don't even care anymore. And then we want, next, more money, more things, more cars. And so I was like, if we are innately wired to always want more and to always, want to sort of usurp the last thing that we achieved or accomplished, then what would be that one element that would not destroy us by perpetually wanting more? And to me, the answer was consciousness. And so conscious economics, that the most valuable currency in this new sort of world would be consciousness, because the forever pursuit of more consciousness only leads us to this deeper state of awareness. Perhaps we never achieve the thing that we want to achieve, but in constantly wanting more awareness, we can maybe get to the point of realizing that there is never enough and then make peace with the now. And so that was kind of part of it.
I love that very much. I'm like madly in love with this concept of conscious economics. Obviously, you guys know that. But the quote that came to mind as you said that was actually a quote I noted from a book I recently read called The Psychology of Money. And it said, the hardest financial skill is getting the financial goalpost to stop moving, which is exactly what you're saying here. And that's a struggle because every single time we achieve a specific milestone, whichever that milestone might be, maybe it's a number or specific career achievement or whatever, it's always not about celebrating where we just got to, but really automatically thinking about what's next, really. And it's just that hustle culture.
Well, and I've heard this, and I know I've experienced this, and I've heard this repeatedly from artists or people that have achieved, a platinum album or like an incredible show or a great award, and there's almost this hollowness or this vacancy that comes in where it's like, well, how will I ever repeat that? Or when people come up to you after you've just done something amazing, people come up to you and go, what's next? And it's like, like it's so frustrating, but that is so ingrained.
And it shows up in very subtle ways sometimes, and it's not necessarily from a monetary perspective all the time. Sometimes it's like, oh, you just got engaged, when's the wedding? Oh, you just got married, when's the baby? Like it's also these like little lifestyle thing, not little, they're massive lifestyle milestones, but it's also in that constant like, what's next? And I know very much so that the specific rush for the future is very evident in my family particularly. And I think I've noticed it a lot with people who grew up in war zones or areas of high adversity because of the complete unknown and instability of the future. You have this rush to achieve everything you ever want like right now because the future is not guaranteed. I mean, this is a theory of mine, but I highly suspect it has a lot to do with the environmental volatility I grew up around.
For sure. It makes a lot of sense. Although, interestingly enough, anything in the future is an illusion.
Yeah.
Because we don't know the future. The only thing we know and have is the present moment. The only thing that is enough is what we have right now. Because everything else is just a mirage, really.
Yeah.
Anything could happen to me tomorrow where I don't get to experience. And then the currency or the impact of this moment means so much more after it's been taken away. So it's so interesting. Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode. Yeah.
So here's a reflection prompt for the listeners. I would love for you to explore, when was the last time you automatically moved that milestone goalpost the second you've achieved it, and reflect on why you did that. Like, was it something you did unconsciously, or was it like a social expectation, or was it just a rush of dopamine desire because like you got a dopamine hit when you reached a goal and now you just can't wait for the second hit? Like, reflect on what was that goal that you achieved to begin with. How fast did you move the goalpost and why you moved the goalpost? And this gives you more depth and understanding and awareness to how these things are running your life, so that you can become more aware and intentional in how you control these things moving forward. So that's one angle. The second angle is the biological, neurological way of looking at things. And that's naturally because we are wired that way. And we are wired that way to survive. And it's part of our, evolutionary instincts. But now we're not just looking to survive, we're looking to thrive. So a lot of what we do, there's a theory called the self-determination theory, which suggests that people are motivated to grow and change by 3 universal psychological needs, and that's their need for autonomy, their need for competence, and connection. These 3 needs ultimately drive our desire for wanting more. And that's like innately ingrained with who we are. And because we're living in a society that we are living more in anticipation of what's happening next versus being in the present of what's really happening. And we're constantly looking for that next dopamine hit, like we said earlier. That concept of wanting more is now very much ingrained in our psychological and biological wiring.
Yeah. Well, if we even think of what is, at the center of any kind of addictive tendency, it's to not sit in the now. It's to escape the present moment. And I know, I have suffered from this, continue to constantly want to escape the present moment. Like I do. You hate sitting in the discomfort of the now. And we're so programmed, and then society keeps kind of offering a distraction, a thing. I mean, our phones are constantly taking us out of the now and into something else. So it is such an act of, maybe like defiance to actually appreciate the present moment and the now and this concept of enough.
Well, what you're saying is so true, because even though we're like there's the nature and nurture concept. So we're wired a certain way, and then there's the additional layer of social reinforcement of these things. Because we can obviously be wired a certain way and then cultivate different patterns that support us differently. But because of this social construct that reinforces these patterns even so much stronger than ever before in history, that constant pursuit of more is even further ingrained in our identity. Like, there's this concept of wanting more is like a natural way of being. Wanting less, or such as decluttering your closet, for example, that's actually a hard thing to do. Like, to get yourself to declutter is so hard. But the hardest thing of all is the concept of enough. So like, more is easy, it comes naturally to us. Less is hard, but enough is so hard. It's like a different level of trying to integrate this concept into our life.
But I feel like in some ways this concept of enough and actually finding finding our liberation in that and reprogramming, because again, we talk about, we are conditioned, we are wired, and it makes it feel like that's permanent, that will never go away. But the truth is that as we evolve as a society, as we learn more, both etherically but also scientifically, we know that the brain is malleable. Mm-hmm. We know that these innate forces that run some of our most basic instincts can be over time rewired, that we can actually start to, as a society, focus less on the limbic brain or like the reptilian brain and start to actually light up that prefrontal cortex, which is like the place of enlightenment. It's the place where that comes. So if we as a collective society started to challenge ourselves, knowing that we are innately wired this way and that our society continues to keep reinforcing that, but actually pull against that into something else, this is how we create a collective shift in consciousness.
I love that you said that, particularly because when I sit with clients, I focus more on the coachable things that we can work on. And that's really when it comes to mindset shifts that we can create, simply because the concept of personality is more stable. Like personality doesn't change as much, but mindset and certain patterns can be coached. So this specific point here is around social comparison, and it's all around that topic, because social comparison isn't necessarily a bad thing. We obviously, just like the concept of wanting more, it's also ingrained in us, and that also goes back to our evolutionary instinct. However, there's different ways where you can incorporate social comparison. Are you comparing yourself to an aspirational goal or a mentor that you're looking up to and you're inspired towards? Or are you comparing yourself upward to people that you feel you don't measure up to, and you're constantly feeling like you're living behind, and that you're not what keeping up with the Joneses is all about, right? So there's different ways in which you can evaluate how does social comparison currently exist in your life. How often you do it, how do you do it, and how do you react to it when you do it, and start implementing some coachable tips to shift the way you compare yourself to others. Because stopping comparing yourself to others is not a attainable goal, nor is it expected of anyone, but shifting the way you compare yourself to others is really the better approach here.
Or just even bringing awareness of like, oh wow, I compared myself just there, or like this is a natural thing. I actually did that 2 days ago. I judged someone. Like I saw someone and I instantly judged them on something, which is something I want to be better at, and something that I don't necessarily want to be doing, but it is instinctual. So I judged someone based on just a first impression of what I saw, and then I walked away from it, and instead of ignoring it or whatever, I said, oh, I acknowledge that I judged. I acknowledge that I do that. Oh, interesting.
And when you noticed that you judged, did you approach that from a place of judgment on yourself, which is interesting, or were you compassionate about the fact that you are aware of it?
Well, traditionally speaking, I would be judging myself then for judging and feeling like, oh my God, why am I this bad person? But then I was like, no, everybody judges. And if we are going to get into a space of having authentic dialogue around these things of changing, we have to admit everybody judges. It's part of, again, it's that limbic brain. It's that, we scan the surrounding to see if there's a threat or there's an opportunity or there's a whatever. Yeah. So it is part of how we take something in. And then of course there's all of these other, layers to how that shows up. The other interesting thing that came up for me is the only time that I've ever really heard the concept of enough or the word enough used in my household was when someone was mad and said, I've had enough. And it was only around anger of like, I've had enough, so now the anger is coming. And that's a really interesting thing. Like that was the only time that threshold was used.
Yes. I really find that interesting. You're right, actually. Now that I think about it, that's how it was definitely used in my household as well. So
you've had enough.
Yeah, you've had enough, maybe like enough food, especially when you're being disciplined around that, because that was a big shaming topic for me. So that's another thing we can invite the listener to reflect on, like what was the concept of enough in your life growing up, and what do you feel or think about when that word it is introduced to you today. So to go back to what the lenses that we're exploring this concept from, the last lens I wanted to explore, which I found super cool, is the economical historical lens.
Yes.
But the reason this is really cool is in the 1800s, the majority of people were living in poverty, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's the exact opposite. You can look into the world GDP graph from the 1700 to the 1950. It was very, very slightly moving upward.
Mm-hmm.
But from 1950 to 2015, it's almost like a very, very steep slope upward. So it's like a straight line and it's up.
Yeah.
And even though that sudden burst of wealth, which was very parabolic, it definitely didn't come with increased levels of happiness. And what's interesting to notice is that back in the day, the concept, even when you watch movies that are dated in the Victorian era or whatnot, the rich were looked at as idle. They were lazy, they're unproductive. The status of doing nothing was looked like up for, like if you're rich and you're doing nothing, that's a symbol of status. Now it's the exact opposite. The wealthiest people in our society are also the ones who are time poor. They are actually the ones who are busy, and now busy became a status symbol.
And I'm too busy for this.
Yes.
I'm too busy for that. Wow. So interesting. Well, I think about it, I mean, in context, if you think of just economic systems, and if you think of the capitalist, or what we know capitalism to be right now, or how it's expressing itself, it does feel like it's rooted in this: there's never enough. There's never enough. There's always someone who's going to beat you. There's always someone who's going to, like, around every corner, there's someone more educated than you that's coming up to get your jobs. You better push yourself further to get up to reach this peak of something, and leave everyone behind for it, so that you can get to this, top, whatever it is. We don't even know what the threshold is. And that's where this question of, like, millionaires to billionaires comes in. Like, do we even need billionaires? Does anyone need that much?
Yeah, we talked about it in one of our episodes recently.
What's enough there? Like, and why? To what point? Like, to what end?
To what extent?
And then if we think of, like, a communist sort of setup, it's almost this idea of enough being dictated for you. Like, this is your part, this is your ration, this is your thing, and everyone gets the same. And there's revolt there as well, because people don't feel, well, there's all sorts of reasons why different things have happened. So we're in this really interesting reckoning right now where we're, the body politic is critiquing capitalism and its forces on the planet, but then there's this movement towards a collective socialism per se, but we've also seen that fail and fail and fail and fail time and time again. So we sit at this really interesting intersection of, like, what is next? What is, how do we feel enough, but not like someone else has dictated that? Because you said autonomy is one of the things that we strive for. So that fundamentally gets taken away if someone else dictates what's enough and what isn't to you.
And even though these are really interesting topics that we can really easily get lost in the weed for, especially when we're talking about macro systems that are so much more complex to study, because now you're creating a system that is meant to work for a lot of people. My invitation to our listeners is really to adopt a system that works at least on a micro level in your own personal life, one that is intentional, mindful, and authentic to you. And this is why these concepts that we explore are offering you framework and lenses and reflection prompts, so you can think about all these things that are playing, like they're all these factors that are playing a part of your life, most likely in your subconscious mind, and we're trying to just bring them to your awareness so you can at least be aware of what they are and control the mindset shifts that we talk about, so you can cultivate a life of meaning and purpose to you. And the next layer to that is really to, as a society, collectively start working towards a system that's productive to our collective well-being, economical well-being, and financial wellness, because so far there hasn't been a system that really served us on these levels.
I think that that's such a good point and a good strong point to end on. And I know that, we have so many discussions about all these things all the time. And one of the things that I keep saying is the answer hasn't been created yet.
Yes.
And so again, we tend to see this like pendulum swing between like a matriarchal society, a patriarchal society. You know, we swing from like a capitalism to then back to like a socialism. And it's like, I actually think that whatever the thing is, the answer is the new sublime innovation. It's going to come from this idea that none of these really have fully worked. So what's the new thing that can work? And are we evolved, enlightened, and like hungry enough to find out what that is?
Yes, absolutely. Such a great point to end on. We invite you to obviously reach out for us to share your stories, your reflections, anything really that this podcast inspired in you. And we're always here to listen and offer some guidance along the way.
Yes. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you, Aseel, for this amazing topic. We'll see you again next week on the Conscious Economics podcast. Bye for now.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.